blow this up.
Look alive, Bomb Squad. We are back for another installment of Let's Blow This Up. I'm your host, Jason Sircone, and today we're going to take a look at attention-grabbing podcast titles. Why are they so important in today's podcast landscape? And how can you create podcast titles that grab attention and put asses in the seat? It's a very important part. Obviously, you want to grow, you want to make your podcast stand out, and having good titles for your episodes are going to help you do just that. Now, before we dive into this full bore, I want to take some time to talk about the big picture of the early stages of podcast discoverability and how your kick-ass titles will fit into this. Now, of course, we only have a few minutes together today, so I'm not going to go into every possible detail that I can. I'm going to give you the Cliff's Notes version on this early stage and how a good podcast title is going to play into it. Now, think about when you're looking for a new podcast to consume. More than likely, you're very intentional about it. And I feel this is where search has gone in our modern world. We are going to Google, YouTube, even ChatGPT and Perplexity, or in the case of podcasts, we're going to our podcast apps and we're typing in exactly what we want to listen to. So let's just say you are looking for a podcast about podcasting. First of all, you found one, so welcome. But if that's the search term that you put in on Apple Podcasts, for example, you're going to be presented with a number of options from that search query. Now, as you look through the list that you were offered, what's the one that you're more than likely going to click on first? It's the one that grabs your attention. And how did it grab your attention? Two factors on that front end. First, a show title or a show name that really stands out, that's bold, that's clever, that in essence, this won't necessarily be something that the person's thinking about just yet, but it's very identifiable with your brand, and they will learn that as they go through the show. But something that grabs attention right out of the gates. Right alongside of that is the cover art, something that looks very creative and has something that's eye-catching, has nice bold colors. It's not plain. It doesn't look like it was just whipped together. These are things that people see, and then that catches the eye, and it says, "Ooh, okay, this is what I'm looking for." They're offering that. Let me click on that and see what else is in there. I know from my own consumption habits, my next step is to look through the catalog at some of the episode titles. And this is where kick-ass attention-grabbing titles will help your cause. Because as we're scrolling through that, we're looking for something that's a little off the wall, maybe, something that has a hook to it, something that makes us think, something that intrigues us to say, well, what do they mean by that? Maybe it's asking a question. Maybe it's putting something in front of us that's so undeniable that we can't possibly pass it by because we're just going to wonder what the hell is in there. So now that we click on that, now we can look at the show notes. And if the show notes do a good job of describing what we're going to learn when we press play, what's the next step? Probably to press play, right? To see what that podcast is all about. And now, once the person presses play on your show, you want to make sure that you are delivering exactly what they're looking for. Now, I've got many episodes in this season where this conversation has come up, so please take some time to listen to the archives of season 3. But again, Cliff's Notes version, you want to make sure that you are giving them exactly what they showed up for as fast as possible. So no long-winded, wordy intro, no 10-minute monologue, no series of 50 ads, no reading of a bio for 50 minutes, or, that's an exaggeration, but, like the 2 to 3 minute bio reads followed by the guest saying exactly why they're there or who they are. And there's all these things that could prevent a person from getting to what they showed up for. And inadvertently, podcasters put all of those barriers up. Again, it's not intentional. I've done it too. It's just thinking about things on a different level, which is what I'm driving home with every episode of season 3. It's not just about having a podcast. It's about having a podcast that's functional, that gets people the content they're looking for and gets in that content as fast as possible. So that's my Cliff's Notes version here. Think about all of these elements, because from start to finish, your podcast is a canvas for creativity. And the more creative you can be with all of these elements, the better off your show is going to be. And that's going to lead to growth. That's going to lead to longevity. That's going to lead to you being more invested in the content because you're having so much fun bringing all that creativity to the surface. These are things that will help a podcast stand the test of time. And that's what we don't see enough of in this space. Many people want to start a podcast, but then actually building it and being committed to making it the best possible entity it can be, that oftentimes falls short. My mission has been to stop podcasters from feeling that unfortunate fate. If you're listening to this show, it's because I want you to have a podcast that stands out and serves your brand and positions you as the rightful authority in your space. So people can learn from you, be guided by you, and ultimately become clients, become business partners, become customers. If you don't position yourself as that resource, somebody else will. And I don't want you to lose out to those people. I want you to be the one that stands out. And how can you do that with your podcast? I'm glad you asked. Let's start with the titles. Let's talk about putting these titles to work. Now, I will say, since I started focusing on this more, there's been a lot of changes that I've made to this show. I started in season 2 of Let's Blow This Up, doing the live stream format, and then probably, I don't want to even call it mid-season. It was at the early point when all the people that wanted to join me were in podcasting. And I said, well, I'm in podcasting. This should be the focus. And season 1, there was some focus on it, but that was more about brand building. I had a couple episodes that had a podcast focus to it, but then I started thinking with what I do and who I work with, having a resource about podcasting made complete sense. So I wanted to make that shift. Mission accomplished. Here we are. Now, what can I do to make the episode stand out? The very first thing I looked at was the titles. And I started getting incredibly granular with how I was creating these titles. And above all, I wanted to have fun with it. If we talk about that creativity piece from start to finish, all of these items should be bringing our creativity to its furthest peak. It's so much fun to sit down and just mess around with these titles and see how they come out. Now, I'm going to tell you what I do to determine whether I want to run with a title, but you may find another means of learning how to do this or means of creating these titles, and that's completely fine. But the number one thing that you want to keep in mind is that you want to be presenting something to your audience that's going to make them think about what you're putting in front of them. It's going to intrigue them. It's going to build a little mystery. It's going to hook them. It's going to lead to them pressing play. It's going to lead to them consuming your content. What I do is I go to my WordPress blog and I have a plugin. It's an all-in-one SEO plugin that you can get if you have a WordPress blog. It's a free plugin, and it scores your titles for your blog posts. So I also do this with blog posts. When I write blog posts, I've been a little sparse in that respect. So I apologize if you're here for my writing. Hang on. Stay for my podcasting instead. I feel that's better. But nevertheless, I use that title generator to see how the ideas I came up with score. And if they don't score well, then I continue to tinker. And I've seen titles that I've plugged in for the first time score 90% or above. I've plugged in titles that have scored a 40%. And the way the score generator is built is that if you have a title that is 70 or above, that's a good title for SEO. They consider that you've covered a lot of the bases and checked a lot of the boxes in regards to how you're hooking a person, how you're describing what the content's all about, how it's got keywords built into the actual title. There's a lot that it's scoring you on. But I go into that program with every title that I'm going to run, and I just see what it scores at, and then I tinker from there. Now, maybe I'm a geek, but that's fun. I enjoy that. That's part of the creative side of this. And since I've implemented that into my show, I've had more compliments on the show titles. I've gotten more listeners because of it. And I've stayed way more engaged with creating these fun titles because I know these titles apply to the content. And if it grabs somebody's attention, makes them smile, makes them go, well, what's that about? Or just ultimately, again, the big word, hook. It hooks them to where they click play. I'm confident that when they land here, I'm getting them to the content they showed up for as fast as possible. You know me, and if you've listened to any other episodes, you know we're getting to the content as fast as possible, whether it's me solo or it's the guests that I'm with. If I've got guests with me, we're jumping right into the conversation. It's about a minute in, and here we go. That's what you showed up for. I want to make sure that you're getting exactly what you showed up for. But going back to the titles, if you have a WordPress blog, you can build your titles that way. Also, I've gotten inspiration from Facebook, from Instagram, from TikTok. I read headlines all the time. And I'm not saying that I'm carbon copying those headlines, but I'm seeing how these other creators are utilizing these headlines to grab attention. And I look at how they're building their overall presence by grabbing that attention. In those searches or in those general scrolling moments, I've also come across creators that are offering tips and strategies on how to create a better hook, how to do things better on social media, how to do a number of different things on an elevated level. I take a lot of those tips and then I apply them to podcasting in a number of different ways. So if I'm looking at somebody that's using that first 3 seconds of a reel or a TikTok to say, here's 3 reasons why you need to do X, Y, Z. And if that's grabbing my attention, that tells me that that's probably something that if I do that with my podcast, it's going to grab attention as well, because it's probably going to get discovered through the social media realm at some point in some form, whether it be through clips or whether it's just me doing a talking head talking about the show, or more importantly, and this is my bigger focus, is SEO, search engine optimization, and that organic discoverability. When people are being intentional, I want to make sure that my content is positioned for that. It's just another outlet for setting up the show to be discovered. I'm looking at how I build those titles through Buzzsprout, which is my host, and I have my episodes on the Buzzsprout website that they provide me, which has a very high authority score. Therefore, I can get hopefully more organic discoverability as people are being intentional about what they search for in regards to podcasting. Those titles are going to do so much for you. And I want to reverse this for a second and talk about the ones that aren't so good and habits that you should not get into. Unfortunately, I've seen this with some podcasts and it's still happening. Episode 5 with so-and-so. If I don't know who so-and-so is, why would I listen to episode 5? Now you could say how to build the world's best, I don't know, how to bake the world's best cupcake with so-and-so. I like cupcakes, so maybe I would click on that. Avid cupcake lovers more than likely would be all over that. If so-and-so has expertise to provide, that's what you want to feature in your title. You don't just want to go off their name, because honestly, even if you had a celebrity, a well-known name, and maybe not even like a celebrity on the level of like a Leonardo DiCaprio or somebody on the Hollywood level, but someone that's well-known in your industry that people might stop and say, whoa, that's cool, you've got them on your show. Even if you just put their name, you may lose potential listeners that would click if you would say what that person is talking about. So you have to think beyond just the name and think about the actual content itself. Find something clever from what they said. Bake that into your title. If you have a specific theme that you're sticking to for that conversation, that's what you want to build that title around. But make sure it's doing something to grab a person's attention. Episode 5 with so-and-so will not do that. Another point that I'm going to bring up here, Jay Franzi made this comment on our episode about growth. If you go back in the co-host collective series, that when Jay and I talked about different growth strategies, titles were a big aspect of our conversation. And one of the things that he said that really stood out to me, and I couldn't believe it because he said this was from a podcast that talks about podcasting and how to do it well. Their episode title was episode 1 and then had the name of the show and then the title. And why that's wrong is because think about how you look at this on your dashboard in your car. it's cut off. And that's what he said, was that episode, by the time it got to where it would say what the name of the show was, or the title of the show was, it was cut off by episode whatever and the name of the podcast. That's redundant, because I think of my screen in my car, right below where the title of the show is the name of the show. And then to the right of that is the cover art for either that particular episode, or if they're not using individual episode covers, the artwork for the show. So you want to make sure that these titles are visible. They don't get lost in the shuffle. And even thinking from a scrolling perspective, if there's too much fluff blocking out the main content of that show, a person's more liable to skip past it or keep scrolling onto something else. All of this works together to create one big experience, and you have to get your people through the first few steps so they can experience the rest. Because if they don't get captivated on the front end, there's no hope of your content ever grabbing their attention in the middle, because they never got there to begin with. Does that make sense? Think about this as the gatekeeper. Your title could potentially open the door for somebody to come on in and consume what you have for them. Or if it's done poorly, it could keep the door shut and push them towards your neighbors. And that's the last thing you want, because you are pouring a ton of time and effort and sweat and tears and money and everything else into creating this content. So you want to make sure that you're doing your part to intrigue somebody to consume it. And that's the name of the game here. Create great content. Keep your focus on that, of course. But when you get to that piece where you're trying to get somebody intrigued, don't slack. Don't put episode 5 with so-and-so. Don't put episode 5 about this. I've seen that too. Think of something that's going to grab attention, and think of your own consumption habits when you're searching for something that's going to potentially light you up and give you answers to answers to a problem that you've been looking for. What grabs your attention? When you start thinking on that level, it's going to put you in a mind space or a head space that allows you to create that type of content for your listener. And it's across the board. It's not just from the content within the episode. It's with that title as well. Find some courses if you want to learn more about this. I read a great book in the past. I'm going to say it now, but I forget the author, and that sucks that I forget the author. But the name of the book is Hook Point. Go to Amazon and search for Hook Point. In fact, I will put that link in the show notes so you can connect to that book. Great read and great information about building hooks and understanding the psychology of what hooks us as human beings. These are the things that you need to focus on in today's podcast landscape, because people's attention spans are short and they're very intentional about the content that they're looking for. If you can serve that up to them in the best way possible and make it as easy as possible to learn about what your show's about and intrigue them to the point that they press play, that's how you're going to experience growth, and that's how you're going to be able to impact people with your content. It starts with the title, then everything else can blow up from there. That is going to conclude today's installment of Let's Blow This Up. I hope you had a great time. I know I did. I will see you again on the very next installment of Let's Blow This Up. If you have not done so already, jump back in the archives, check out some of the great content that already exists from this season, and stay tuned, because as we enter the home stretch of season 3, we got some great content in store for you. So until our paths cross again here on Let's Blow This Up, my name is Jason Sircone, reminding you to stay explosive.